My name is Eliza Thorne, and tonight, on what should be the crowning achievement of my father's life, I'm going to destroy it. We're at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, surrounded by the city's elite, the air thick with the scent of money and self-congratulation. My father, Arthur Vance, has just accepted a Lifetime Achievement Award, his speech a masterclass in feigned humility. He speaks of legacy, of building something that lasts, but he never tells the rest of the story. He never tells you the price of that legacy. As he steps away from the podium, the applause is deafening. The host turns to me, a warm, expectant smile on her face. Eliza, won't you share a few words about your father? This is it, the moment. I walk to the stage, the spotlight feeling less like a warmth and more like an interrogation lamp. I look directly at my father, whose face glows with pride. Thank you, I begin, my voice steady, betraying the tremor in my hands. My father always spoke of legacy. But if we're going to talk about the Vance legacy, let's tell the whole truth. Let's talk about Med-Innovate. Let's talk about the Peterson family. And let's talk about what really happened in the winter of 2008. The smile on his face doesn't just fade, it shatters. The room falls silent. My story doesn't begin on this stage. It begins in the gilded cage he built for me, a sprawling brownstone on Beacon Hill where every achievement was measured, every choice was preordained, and my own dreams were considered a liability to the family's master plan. If you've ever felt trapped by someone else's expectations, let me know where you're watching from right now, because you'll understand the prison I had to escape. That prison had walls of marble and windows that overlooked the Charles River, but it was a prison all the same. The escape plan wasn't dramatic. It was academic. My father had my life mapped out, an undergraduate degree in finance from MIT, followed by an MBA, then a seat at the table of his biotech empire, Vance Industries. It was a path paved with gold, and it led straight to a life that wasn't mine. My rebellion was a single application form. Secretly, I applied to Harvard for their bioethics and law program. When the acceptance letter arrived, offering a substantial scholarship, it felt like a key sliding into a lock I didn't even know I could open. When I told him, the explosion wasn't fiery, it was icy. He didn't yell. Arthur Vance never yelled. He simply went into his study, and I could hear the cold, controlled fury in his voice as he called his contacts, trying to have my scholarship revoked. An administrative error, he'd claim. When that failed, he summoned me. "This is an act of war, Eliza," he said, his voice as flat as a tombstone. "You are choosing to stand against this family. Therefore, you are no longer a part of it." He cut me off completely. That night, as I packed my bags, my mother slipped into my room. Her face was pale, her hands trembling as she pressed an envelope into my hand. It was cash, thousands of dollars. "I sold the Degas sketch," she whispered, her voice cracking. It was a small piece he'd bought her on their honeymoon, her most cherished possession. "Go," she said. "Live the life I never dared to." It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Who in your life has been your silent supporter? Type 1 in the comments if it was your mom, 2 for a friend, or 3 for someone else entirely. It was their money that built my prison, but it was her sacrifice that bought my freedom. Freedom, I quickly learned, had a steep price. The scholarship covered tuition, but Cambridge, Massachusetts, is an unforgivingly expensive city. My mother's sacrifice gave me a start, but it wouldn't last forever. While my former peers were posting photos from their family yachts on Nantucket, I was juggling 3 jobs. My days began at 5 a.m. at a campus coffee shop, the hiss of the espresso machine, my morning alarm. My evenings were spent in the quiet, dusty stacks of the Widener Library, reshelving books until midnight. Weekends were for my research assistantship, poring over dense legal texts for a pittance. My world shrank to a tiny, shared dorm room that always smelled faintly of burnt toast and desperation. More than once, I fell asleep on a pile of textbooks, waking up with the imprint of a legal code on my cheek. But in that struggle, I found something my father's money could never buy: genuine connection, my chosen family. There was Liam, a brilliant computer science major from a working-class family in South Boston, who taught me how to fix my dying laptop and, more importantly, how to laugh at the absurdity of our situation. There was Maya, a fiery political science student from California who dragged me to protests and showed me that my voice was a weapon. One evening, my brother Preston showed up unannounced, sent by my father. He wore a suit that probably cost more than my entire semester's rent and held out a cashier's check. "He'll forgive everything," Preston said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Just come home." I looked at the check, at the zeros that represented a life of comfortable silence, and then I looked at my worn-out textbooks. I tore the check in half and handed it back to him. "My soul isn't for sale," I told him. He just shook his head, as if looking at a lost cause, and walked away. I had nothing, but in that moment, I felt richer than he could ever imagine. While my personal life was a balancing act on a knife's edge, my academic life was where I truly came alive. This was thanks to one person, Professor Isabella Rossi. She was a legend in Harvard's law school, a brilliant, passionate expert in bioethics with a razor-sharp mind and zero tolerance for mediocrity. She saw something in me that had nothing to do with the Vance name. She saw the fight. After a particularly grueling seminar where I'd argued a point to death, she kept me after class. "Thorne," she said, leaning against her desk, "you don't just argue. You advocate. There's a fire in you. Don't let this place extinguish it." She became the mentor I never had, the intellectual guide my father, with all his power, could never be. In my second year, she assigned our class a semester-long research project, a historical analysis of corporate collapses in the biotech sector. "Look for the patterns," she instructed. "Behind every spectacular failure is a story of hubris, a fatal flaw, or something far more sinister." My assigned case file seemed ordinary at first. Med-Innovate, a promising startup that had abruptly declared bankruptcy in 2008, just before a revolutionary drug was set for FDA trials. The name pinged something deep in my memory, a half-forgotten echo from my childhood. I remembered hushed, angry conversations between my father and another man at our home. The name Med-Innovate, spoken like a curse. I'd been too young to understand, but the feeling of cold, final door-slamming anger had stuck with me. Now the name was staring back at me from a case file. It's a strange feeling, isn't it, when your gut tells you something is important before your brain can explain why. If you believe in intuition, just type the word trust in the comments. I shook it off as a coincidence, but I couldn't escape the feeling that I had just stumbled upon the first thread of a web I was never meant to find. That thread pulled me in deeper than I could have imagined. Over the next year, my research on Med-Innovate became an obsession. The official story was a simple case of mismanagement and running out of funds, but the timeline never added up. Key data from their clinical trials went missing. Their primary materials supplier mysteriously defaulted. It was too clean, too catastrophic. The truth, however, remained buried. It wasn't until Thanksgiving of my senior year that the grave was unearthed. My mother had pleaded with me to come home just for one day, her voice thin with a loneliness I couldn't refuse. I was in my father's old study, searching for a childhood book in the built-in shelves, when I noticed it. The small, wall-mounted safe behind a painting was slightly ajar, its door jammed. My father, a man of meticulous security, had made a mistake. Curiosity got the better of me. I pried it open. Inside, behind dusty stock certificates, was a single, unlabeled external hard drive. It felt cold and heavy in my hand. That night, back in my dorm, I called Liam. "I have a weird favor to ask," I said. "I found a drive, and it's encrypted with something I don't recognize." 3 hours and a lot of frantic coding on his end later, a file directory popped up on my screen. The folder was titled MI Cleanup. My heart hammered against my ribs as I clicked it open. It was all there. A chain of emails between my father and a shell corporation, detailing the systematic theft of Med-Innovate's intellectual property, a memo outlining a plan to disrupt their supply chain by acquiring and then bankrupting their main supplier. And the final, sickening document, a purchase order for Med-Innovate's patent portfolio, bought for pennies on the dollar out of bankruptcy court by another shell company, which then licensed it back to Vance Industries. It wasn't just corporate raiding, it was a planned execution. And my father was the one holding the axe. I carried that knowledge like a radioactive core in my chest for the rest of my senior year. Every academic award, every congratulation felt hollow, tainted by the secret I was holding. I graduated summa cum laude, my name called to a cheering crowd of my friends. But all I could think about was the man whose name I shared and the crimes he'd committed. The hard drive sat in a safety deposit box, a ticking time bomb. What was I supposed to do? Go to the authorities and obliterate my family in one fell swoop? My mother, my brother Caleb, they would be collateral damage. Confront him privately and be met with denial and threats. Or bury it and let the poison of the secret fester inside me for the rest of my life, making me complicit in his silence. I was paralyzed by the weight of the decision. Then, 2 weeks after graduation, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived. It was an invitation to the Vance Family Foundation Gala. My father was being honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award for his philanthropy and contributions to Boston's biotech community. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. Tucked inside was a handwritten note on his personal stationery, the first direct communication from him in 4 years. The elegant, sharp cursive was just like him, controlled and cutting. "Eliza," it read, "enough time has passed. It is time to heal our family and celebrate the legacy we have built. Come and see what you have been fighting against. Your presence would mean the world." It wasn't an apology. It was a summons, a command performance. He wasn't offering peace. He was offering a return to the fold on his terms. He was dangling the very thing I had once craved, his approval, as bait. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that if I went, the story would end, One way or another, on that stage, I accepted. Walking into that gala felt like stepping onto a battlefield in a ball gown. The room was dripping with old money and new power, a sea of influential faces my father had cultivated for decades. He was in his element, the benevolent king of Boston Biotech. I was seated at the main table, a strategic placement designed to display a reunited family, a prop. I exchanged strained pleasantries with my mother, who looked elegant but fragile, and my brothers, who wouldn't meet my eyes. Then came the main event. My father took the stage to a standing ovation. He began his speech with practiced charm, thanking the foundation, his colleagues, and his beautiful family. He spoke of innovation, of pushing boundaries, of building a better future. Then, his eyes found me in the crowd, and the tone shifted. "A legacy," he said, his voice resonating with false sincerity, "is a fragile thing. It requires not just vision from one generation, but dedication from the next." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "And while we must encourage young people to find their own path, we pray they don't get lost on idealistic detours, forgetting the very foundation upon which they stand. We pray they understand that true change comes from building upon strength, not from tearing it down in the name of abstract principles." It wasn't a hint. It was a public execution. He was painting me as a naive, ungrateful child in front of everyone who mattered in our world. I could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on me, some curious, some pitying. The humiliation was a physical force, hot and suffocating. But beneath it, something else rose up. A cold, hard clarity. He had just handed me the microphone, and he had no idea what I was about to say. At this exact moment, what would you have done? If you would have walked out, comment, walk. If you would have confronted him, comment, fight. My choice was already made. The host, oblivious to the undercurrent of war, beamed at me. "Eliza, a few words for your father?" I gave her a small, tight smile and walked toward the podium. Every step was deliberate. The path from my chair to that stage felt like the longest walk of my life, but my fear had been burned away, replaced by a chilling sense of purpose. I adjusted the microphone, my hands perfectly steady now. The room was so quiet you could hear the ice clinking in glasses. "Thank you," I started, my voice clear and amplified, reaching every corner of the grand hall. "My father is right. Legacy is important. And so is the truth." I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the audience before they landed, and stayed on Arthur Vance. His confident smirk was beginning to falter. He spoke of building, of strength, a powerful legacy indeed, so powerful, in fact, that it could withstand the complete and utter destruction of a rival company, a company started by a family friend, no less. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. "He's talking about a company called Med-Innovate," I continued, my voice never wavering. "And a family called the Petersons. My father's legacy was built on a foundation of their ruin, achieved through systematic intellectual property theft and supply chain sabotage." Arthur was half risen from his seat, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. My mother looked like she was about to faint. "He probably thinks this is just an accusation, a daughter's emotional outburst," I said, addressing the room. "But what he doesn't know is that the entire evidentiary record, every email, every memo, every illegal transaction, was sent to my attorney and a secure third-party server 30 minutes before I arrived tonight. The truth is already out of his control." I turned my gaze back to him. "So, yes, By all means, let's celebrate my father's legacy, the real one. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I simply placed the microphone back in its stand, turned away from my father's ashen face, and walked out of the museum, leaving a crater of stunned silence behind me. Before I had even made it to the street, my phone began to vibrate uncontrollably. The first wave of texts was from friends, a flurry of, "Are you okay?" and "What just happened?" But then the second wave began. News alerts. Before the gala had even officially ended, financial bloggers who had been in attendance were already posting. By morning, my face was on the front page of the Boston Globe, and Bloomberg had a breaking story. Vance Industries heir apparent accuses CEO, father of corporate sabotage at charity gala. The empire trembled. Vance Industries stock opened with a catastrophic $2 billion loss in market cap, plummeting over 40% before trading was halted. The board of directors announced an emergency meeting, but the real blow came that afternoon. The Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, announced a formal investigation into Arthur Vance and the historical acquisition of Med-Innovate's assets. The final nail was personal. By evening, a court order had frozen all of my father's personal and family trust assets pending the investigation. In less than 24 hours, the Vance dynasty, with its untouchable wealth and pristine reputation, had been brought to its knees. My mother, my brothers, everyone who had lived under the protection of that name was suddenly adrift, cut off from the very source of their power. The truth wasn't just a revelation, it was a reckoning, and its consequences were swift and brutal. Telling the truth often comes with a cost. Think about a time you spoke up. What was the biggest consequence you ever faced? Share your story below, because the aftermath is where the real healing begins. In the days that followed, I went dark. I turned off my phone, ignored the knocking at my door, and watched the storm I had created from the safety of my small Cambridge apartment. The story had a life of its own now, a ravenous beast feeding on speculation and financial analysis. I had detonated the bomb. Now, I was just watching the shockwave travel. Then an email slipped through my filters. The subject line was just one word: Med-Innovate. The sender's name was Daniel Peterson. I knew that name. Mr. Peterson had been my father's friend back when I was a child. He used to bring me imported chocolates. His son Daniel was a few years older than me. We had played together once or twice at family barbecues before they suddenly vanished from our lives. My hands trembled as I opened it. He was now an investigative journalist for ProPublica. He had spent the last 7 years of his life trying to piece together the truth of his family's destruction. His father had died 2 years after the bankruptcy from what the doctors called a stress-induced heart attack, but Daniel called it a broken heart, believing he had failed everyone. Daniel wrote that he had collected dozens of off-the-record interviews, testimonies from former Med-Innovate employees who knew they had been sabotaged but had no proof. He had the human story, the whispers, the pain. "The world saw my father as a failure," he wrote. "I have the why, but you have the how. The SEC will prosecute, but they won't tell the human story. Help me give my father his legacy back. Go on the record with me. Let's publish everything." The email landed like a second grenade in my lap. The SEC investigation was a faceless legal process. This was different. This was a choice: to partner with the son of my father's victim and personally hand the world the tools to crucify my family, or to let the system run its course while the full human truth remained buried. My revenge had been calculated, But it was aimed at one person's power, not at the total annihilation of everyone around me. I met with Daniel Peterson in a quiet coffee shop in Somerville. I told him I couldn't be the public face of his story. My mother and brother had suffered enough collateral damage, but I also couldn't let the full truth die with the SEC reports. I slid a thumb drive across the table. "This is a complete anonymous copy," I said. "Use it for deep background. Corroborate the stories your witnesses have been telling you for years. You don't need my name to write the truth." He looked at the drive, then at me, and nodded, a look of profound, weary gratitude on his face. He would finally be able to give his father justice. That decision felt right, like the first clean choice I'd made in years. The next one came from my mother. She called me a week later. Her voice, for the first time since I was a child, sounded clear, without the fragile, apologetic tremor I'd grown so used to. She had filed for divorce. But it was more than that. She was activating her own trust fund, money from her parents, artists from New York, that had remained legally separate from my father's empire throughout their entire marriage. She was using it to create the Eleanor Fund. Its mission was simple and a direct rebuke to my father's entire life philosophy: to provide seed funding and legal support for ethical biotech startups, specifically those being bullied or targeted by larger corporate predators. And its first director of operations, she told me with a quiet pride, was my brother Caleb. He had walked out of Vance Industries 2 days after the gala, leaving a one-line resignation letter on my father's desk. They were building something new from the wreckage, a different kind of legacy, an honest one. It's been a year since that night at the gala. The legal battles against my father are ongoing, a slow grind of justice that will take years. I hear he's a smaller man now, the larger-than-life titan reduced to a defendant. My brother Preston still doesn't speak to me, too deeply enmeshed in the wreckage of the old world. But I have hope. My mother and Caleb, with their small but mighty fund, have already helped 2 brilliant startups secure their footing. And me. I accepted a position at a nonprofit law firm in Philadelphia that advocates for medical ethics, using my knowledge not for destruction, but for protection. I am building my own legacy, one small, true brick at a time. I've learned that legacy isn't a vault of money or a name on a building that you inherit. It's the integrity of the choices you make every single day. True strength isn't found in maintaining a flawless, perfect facade. It's found in the courage to take a sledgehammer to a beautiful lie so you can build a life on a foundation of truth. We are all given a story, but we get to choose whether we will be a minor character in someone else's epic or the author of our own. It's the hardest choice, but it's the only one that leads to freedom. Thank you for listening to my story. If you believe that your life is your story to write and no one else's, then prove it. Hit that subscribe button and join this community of people who choose courage over comfort. Let's remind each other that true strength isn't about being unbreakable. It's about being brave enough to break, so you can rebuild yourself into who you were always meant to be. Be true to yourselves. I'll see you in the next one.